Jai Sadgurudev. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all the listeners. We welcome all the listeners on this Vihangam Yoga Global Online Satsang. Today, as usual, we are present here with a very interesting topic to discuss with all of you. We have our speaker, Abhinav from Australia. Welcome, Abhinav on the forum. Just to give a little bit more background about this topic, we have different sense organs, external sense organs. At the same time, we have 4 inner organs as well, and one of them is mind. We have to understand what this mind is, how does it function, why it has to be controlled, how it creates problem in our day-to-day life as well as in spiritual journey both. We are going to talk more about this particular topic, controlling the mind, why it is important. Please put your questions for further discussions on this particular topic on slido.com/vygos. So, Abhinavji, now the forum is for you to take care of. Abhinavji from Australia.
Thank you very much, Subhashji. And thank you to everyone listening as well for taking out the time on a weekend to fulfill your spiritual interests and give us the opportunity to speak to you about such important topics. So the topic today, as Subhashji mentioned, is why should we control the mind? And in considering this topic, really there's 2 numbers that immediately come to mind. These 2 numbers are 60,000 and 32 gigabytes. And I'm going to go through what these 2 numbers mean in just a moment. As we experience in life, a lot of the time, it is difficult to have a sense of control over what we are doing, over what we want to do, over what we should do. And there is always a sense of conflict which emerges within us. And sometimes it spirals out of control. Sometimes we're able to apply some kind of brakes and bring it to a stop. But again, that tussle begins and ends and begins and ends. The first number, which I mentioned, 60,000, is a number which neuroscientists commonly refer to as the number of thoughts we have per day. Now, this number, of course, is not the same for everyone. Hopefully is not the same for everyone. I would hope it's much less. But it is a concerning number. And the reason for that is, think about it this way. If you have 60,000 thoughts a day, how difficult will it be for you to focus? If you're a student, you'll often experience, even in an exam, you might be thinking about what you're going to do when you get home. You might, when you're at work, if you're an office worker, whilst you're at work, you might be listening to some tunes to keep yourself focused, in a sense. But slowly, you might start thinking about the person whose song you're listening to. And slowly, your energy and your focus goes away from work towards something else, goes away from study towards something else. And the thoughts that we have, the things we think about, they slowly start to evolve into something different to what we expect or want. The second number, 32 gigabytes, is a number which was offered up by the University of Carolina a few years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago. And this number describes the amount of information which we take in every day. Now, this again is a very concerning number. If we think about 32 gigabytes as a number, and we look at our laptop itself, if we were to add 32 gigabytes of data to our laptop every day, it would run out of space quite fast. It would start to, wear out quite fast. The amount of pressure we would be applying on the memory, on the battery, on the hardware of the computer would be quite immense. And the normal functions of the computer would be slowly diminish. And at many points in our own lives, excuse me, at many points in our own lives, we notice that sometimes the day goes so fast and so many things happen and we have to reflect on so many things that it becomes difficult to be still. It becomes difficult to reflect, and it becomes difficult to even think about how the day went because it's going so fast. When I first started my own journey in spirituality in Vihanga, the very question I asked was, why should I control the mind? And slowly, as time has gone on, I've come to understand and experience that the control of mind is really like installing a brake inside oneself. In those moments when things are going too fast, in those moments when things seem a little too out of control, like they're spiraling out of control, we are able to apply the brakes and we're able to stop for a moment and reflect. And this is very important. And if we look at the state of the world today, the amount of information we're consuming is only increasing day by day. There is a lot of literature out there which talks about social media as the new drug. And the reason that it's called a drug is very specific. There is a chemical in the body called dopamine. When we use substances such as drugs, this chemical is released within us. And excuse me. And when it is released, it gives us great joy, great pleasure. And slowly as time goes on, we start to anticipate this feeling, this chemical, more and more. Social media has a similar effect on the brain. And this is why a lot of people are very concerned, a lot of experts are very concerned about what it's doing to our children as well. When we scroll through a newsfeed, as a small example, why do we keep scrolling? It's because every time we come across a new piece of content, we anticipate some kind of joy, some kind of pleasure, some kind of temporary hit. And that is what leads to an increase in dopamine. And slowly, our brain, our chemistry becomes attuned to this process of getting a small hit of dopamine here, a small hit of dopamine there, to the point where even if we're on the bus, when we finally have some time to ourselves, rather than looking at the stars outside, we will look at the stars on our phone. We will look at the stars on our phone and like the photo and talk about the photo with other people, which is great. But the real thing is outside. Why not look outside for a moment? So there are many inherent dangers in the way we go about society and life at the moment, many of which I'm sure a lot of the people on this forum have a lot more information about and think about very deeply every day. The last kind of concept which I'm going to talk about in terms of why, before I move on to how, is if we look at any physical system, one of the biggest markers of the health of any physical system is how much resistance exists in that system. If there is a high amount of resistance in any physical system, which means if there's a lot of collision between forces in a system, then that system will very quickly wear down. Similarly, within our own selves, when we are trying to focus and we are not able to focus, this tells us that there are two conflicting forces within us. One which is telling us what we want to do, and one which is taking us away from that. And in spiritual philosophy, this is known as the tussle, the war between the soul and the mind, between I and the mind. If we notice the very topic, why should I control the mind? In the very topic itself, in the question itself, we are already admitting to ourselves that we are not the mind and we must control it. And so what we really need to do, the reason why, is we must reduce the amount of friction inside our own selves. Mental health, things like depression, Things like sadness, deep sadness, which is uncontrollable, grief, the inability to move on from things, the unfortunate circumstance when we can't let go of the past. These are all symptoms of an uncontrolled mind. And so by controlling the mind, we can face these things with a lot of strength. And we can start to regain, a bit of confidence in our own ability. There is nothing more crushing than telling ourselves, today I'm going to achieve this, and then not being able to achieve it because of our own inability to control ourselves. And so moving on to how and the process, there is a tool through which we can become more still. And through this tool, the ancient yogis and rishis were able to build a map of how this entire human body works and operates. You know, in spirituality, there are names given to different concepts. And some people read these concepts and they think that is what that is. But that is a limited spectrum of understanding. It doesn't matter how much I talk about fire to a child. Until that child experiences the heat of a fire, the actual sight of a fire, the experience of a fire, they will never have a complete understanding of what a fire is. And so in spirituality as well, names have no consequence or meaning. It is the experience which is of utmost importance. In English, we refer to the entity which is directing our energy elsewhere as the mind. In Hindi, it's known as man. In other languages, it's called different things. But the name should not be of importance. The experience is what is of importance. When we sit down and we try to focus and we're not able to, that conflict, that conflicting force, that is the mind. And it is that experience which we need to diminish, which we need to slowly evolve ourselves out of. And so the tool through which we are able to become more still is an ancient tool known as meditation. And there are many forms of meditation. However, before we can control the mind, what we must ask ourselves and what we must ask the people who teach us is, can you tell me where is the mind? If we go to a doctor and we say, doctor, I'm not feeling so great, I'm having some pain in my body, the first thing the doctor will ask is, where is the pain? And then they will diagnose it. Then they will help you through that problem. Similarly, in yogic practice, in spiritual philosophy, we must practice that meditation. We must search for that path where the location of the mind is not a secret, where it is so clear that it is like taking off a mask, seeing the world anew, seeing the world more clearly. And so the process of controlling the mind is meditation, is sadhana. What happens as we control the mind? As we control the mind, many beautiful things start to occur. But the most important and the most clear thing which we start to see is the ability to stop. You can imagine how important it is to be able to stop and pause when you are driving in a car. Imagine if you were not able to do that, how much chaos there would be as you drive that car. And so, similarly in our own lives, the chaos which we sometimes feel, or sometimes which we are not even aware of, becomes very clear to us. In this sense, spirituality does not change our lives. It gives us the opportunity to change it. And there is a very distinct difference here. Meditation is not going to completely 180-degree change you overnight. What it's going to do is give you the ability to do that yourself. Meditation, spirituality is all about optimizing our own existence, our own understanding of self and connection to self. And so, as we think about these concepts, we must ask ourselves, what is it that I'm really after? I'm apparently thinking 60,000 different things a day. How many of those things do I really need to think about? I am taking in so much information every day. Do I really need to take in so much information? What kind of information am I after? And so, by controlling, by controlling the mind, these questions and the answers to these questions become very straightforward. And of course, through the practice of paths such as Vihangam Yoga, this process becomes even more straightforward. And the friction which we feel within us starts to slowly decrease. I'm going to finish on one final point, which is a point which I raised last time as well, about conscious energy. There is one famous word in the modern world, which just from the word comes a lot of things. That word is stress. And just from the word stress, people get stressed. It is such an unfortunate reality. Vihangam Yoga does not talk about stress management. With Vihangam Yoga, the source of stress itself is eradicated. So there's no need to manage it. It disappears. And the reason for that is very straightforward. Stress is the name given to that conflict within us. When we are trying to do something, but something else drives us away from that. And so that constant tussle gives us a lot of problems. And it causes a lot of issues, not only in our mentality, but there's a lot of research which shows that if we are turbulent within ourselves, the body itself becomes harmed. There are many conditions such as IBS, IBD, in which if you are stressed out, your body will experience the symptoms of those diseases even more. And so the mind and the body are inextricably linked. The soul and the mind are also inextricably linked. And that is where we can really do some magic, some science. And what do we really do when we meditate? What we are trying to do when we meditate is to become so still that we are able to see the mind and observe the mind and see it. And through seeing it, we are able to then control it. By clearly seeing it, we are able to see where it gets its energy from. And once we can see where it's getting its energy from, we can then start to optimize the way that energy is being used. Because if you think about it we can think about it this way as well. If we are having 60,000 thoughts a day, think about how powerful the mind is. There are so many amazing things which the human mind has given to us over the years. 200,000 years ago, we lived in the jungles of Africa. From then, we migrated. We developed things like agriculture, societies, civilizations, history, culture. These are all very complex. There is no other species on the planet which is capable of these things. And these are all coming from the one place, one common place, the human mind. And so the mind is capable of incredible things. The question is, are we directing that energy and that potential in the right way? You know, if you look at famous sportsmen, they often talk about how things slow down sometimes, and they're able to take the perfect decision in the right moment. A lot of people refer to that as being in the zone. Some people refer to it as being in a flow state. When we meditate, excuse me, when we begin to control the mind, entering the zone, or entering the flow state as it's called, is a decision. It is not about waiting for a certain set of conditions to be met. It is a decision we can take. We flip the switch, and our conscious energy is completely fixed on the one thing. And we are able to draw out our entire ability and potential. So to summarize, why should I control the mind? An uncontrolled mind brings us much difficulty. When we tell ourselves we want to achieve something, we want to go from point A to B, obstacles start to appear. Obstacles which we think should be within our control because they are decisions that we are taking. Why am I on YouTube? Why am I on Facebook when I should be doing something else? And it's these micro decisions which can start to whittle down our sense of self-esteem and confidence as well. And so, not only for these reasons, but also to optimize our own performance as people, to be more kind to others, to be less reactionary and more empathetic, more compassionate, we must learn how to control the beast, which is the mind. So unfortunately, 15 to 20 minutes is a mammoth task to dive into the depths of the mind. However, I hope I've been able to give some clarity on this topic, and I hope I've been able to incite some curiosity. I look forward to the upcoming questions and discussions, and I thank Sebastian and the team for the opportunity to share my thoughts. So thank you very much. Jai Surleaf.
Thank you very much, Abhinavji. We will talk definitely more about this topic through question and answer. I have noted few of the things which was quite interesting to me as well. 60,000 thoughts roughly every day. 32 gigabyte information space which we are keeping in our mind. These two facts itself are quite interesting and fascinating just to know. We'll talk more about this, Abhinavji. And now moving towards the question and answer session for today's topic. We have, of course, Abhinavji, who was the speaker for today's session. And I would like to welcome Vijay Tabloory ji from USA to join us for this question and answer session. Vijay ji, welcome to the forum. We have a couple of questions in slido.com. And from Abhinavji, whatever he has said, I have noted down few of the things. One of the question which, if I try to relate to what Abhinavji has said, is mentioning that in one of the previous session also it was mentioned that it is not about stopping the thoughts. Rather, it is more about having control on our thoughts. So there is a difference between controlling not having thoughts and it is about stopping the thoughts. Abhinavji also mentioned that having mind in the right direction is more important because uncontrolled mind brings lots of difficulty. Vijayji, I would like to ask you here that when we talk about optimization, when we talk about control of our mind, then does this mean that mind would still work, but in a very specified way, or we are talking that mind should completely stop everything?
Thank you. Thanks for the question, Subhashi. Good morning, everyone. This is Vijay Tabloory joining today's satsang from USA. It's a very good question. So, how does the control mind? How do we control the mind, and how does the control mind actually work? Firstly, how does mind work? Does mind work on its own, or is there a way mind actually works? Mind derives consciousness from soul and carries the same to any part of the body as needed. At a particular time, mind can connect to only one thing as it is a unilocated entity. It connects to one of the sensory organs at a time to activate that organ for perception. And initially, Subhashi also talked about some internal organs, the four internal organs, one of which is mind. This mind, when carries the consciousness to intellect, our intellect acts. And when it connects the consciousness to chitta, or memory, vritti of chitta rises. Without connecting with mind, having the consciousness of soul, the inner organs and the sensory organs are idle as inert entities. So that's why it's important to control this mind, because the uncontrolled mind is busy connecting our own self, which is the soul and its consciousness, to the five dimensions, the five subjects of this creation, of this physical world. So what mind is actually doing, the uncontrolled mind, is only taking away the consciousness of the soul and connecting it to the outer world. It is making the flow of consciousness outward. Swamiji clearly says in Swarved, I think of a Swarved Doha, Atma yog man se rahe, man indriya kar saath, indriya yog jab arth se, vishaya jnana jivanat. The owner of the body, which is the soul, connects to the mind, and mind connects to the sensory organs, and sensory organs connect to the outer subject. And when this entire channel is built, that is when the soul gets the experience of the subject that the organ is in with touch with. So in this entire channel, the window of the soul is the mind. That is why it is important to control this mind and channelize it inwards and do the real purpose or act the real purpose of the soul. Subhashi, I hope I've answered the question with respect to why it's
yes,
important to
Vijayji.
control the mind.
Yes, Vijayji, very much. You mentioned that there is a connection. How the soul, uh, how the soul gets the information from the outer world, the objects. It is basically connecting through the mind, and in fact, Abhinavji also mentioned that there is a connection between body and the mind, and then mind and the soul. There is a connection between soul and mind as well. And he mentioned that there is a tussle of the war between the soul and the mind, and that's how the problem happens with most of us. Abhinavji, when you say there is a tussle between soul and mind, since the mind is taking the conscious energy from the soul, so mind ideally should work as a subset or as a helping entity for the soul. Why there would be a conflict, or why there would be a tussle between these two? Is it that the mind is connecting to the outer world more and it is working on its own, whereas the soul doesn't want that because the objective of the soul is something else, and that's why the conflict happens? Abhinavji?
Yes, absolutely. So, first of all, I really loved Vijayji's explanation. That was beautiful. Thank you. I even learned quite a bit from that, so thank you very much. I would say, yeah, like the tussle really begins. It's kind of like what's happened to us is we've been locked in a room and we've been, bound to a chair in the middle of the room with no light, no windows, nothing. And someone is representing us outside that room. No matter how unhappy we are with that, we are always being represented in some way by this person outside. And unfortunately for us, that person is the mind, and the person who is locked up inside is the soul, which is who we truly are. And the connection between the two is even more unfortunate. That the mind itself, as Vijay was explaining, it is drawing energy from the soul. And so everything which the mind ends up doing, everything which we don't really want to do but ends up happening, at the end of the day, it is always comes back to the soul. That the soul did it. It's the soul's fault. So the soul, the karma, the action, the result of the action is ultimately not going to be, going to be delivered to the mind, but it's going to be delivered to the soul. So even a small thing like an offhanded thought of anger towards someone, that might not be exactly how we truly feel. That might be the mind taking us from one little place to another place. But at the end of the day, that anger, the energy that's come out, that is being empowered by the soul. If the soul did not exist in that scenario, the mind would not be capable of performing that action. So ultimately, the chain of command always, and the chain of responsibility always comes back to the soul. And that's where the tussle really becomes very apparent, because we want to live our life in a certain way. We all have an idea of what we think life should be about, what kind of principles we want to display and represent. But if we're locked up in a room and someone else is representing those values or trying to, and we know that person is always really distracted and is always trying to do things in their own interest with the outside world and their own attachment to different parts of the outside world, how much can we trust that person? The answer is we can't trust that person at all. And so in spiritual philosophy, the mind is very much the Ravan, and the soul is the Ram, is the light, is the source of energy which we have to optimize and start to become clearer on. And we have to unshackle the soul from the mind. I hope that somewhat answers the question.
Yes, thank you, Abhinavji. One question is also there, which says, I'm just reading it out. I think I'm quite strong with my mind. Why should I control it? I think if I try to understand this question, it says that probably at this stage, the person thinks that I'm very strong with my mind, then why should I control it? But I think probably, if I understand it correctly, the strongness of the mind would not stay throughout of our life. Abhinavji also mentioned that we have to gain the energy on a continuous basis, and we need to be focused. We don't have to be out of the control as well. So, Vijayji, if on this question, if I try to understand from you, do you think that if one person thinks I'm very strong mind right now, he will continue being strong throughout of his life and he doesn't need anything? Probably this would move more towards meditation, which I would like to share right now itself. Our next session is about meditation, that meditation and ancient science. We'll talk more next time. Abhinavji also mentioned about how to control the mind on this. So, Vijayji, if you can throw some light on this one, that if somebody feels he's very strong mind right now, will he be strong throughout in his life, or does he need to do something on that?
That's a very good question. But more importantly, Yes, you have to have a strong mind. That's why we want to control it and put it under our control of the soul. So the question is, when someone says, I have a very strong mind, is he talking it's stronger, focusing inwardly or outwardly? Having a strong mind can also be, if it is negative, it could be being very stubborn. That is, if the energies are flowing outward. The energies are flowing inward, where the mind is controlled and is focusing inward and doing the true duties that the soul wants to perform, then that's how you want to control the mind and you want to have that strong mind. So
Yeah,
how
Vijayji.
to control this mind, or how to have this strong mind, if we want to talk about it, it's only possible through Vihangam yoga meditation, because we have occasion, I mean, we know about Arjuna. When we talk about Gita, Arjuna says to Lord Krishna himself, Arjuna, the great warrior, he himself says, hey Krishna, mind is so wavery, it's so impossible to control it. So does that mean that Arjuna, the, the greatest warrior, does not have a strong mind or has his mind under control? So it's, I think the true answer is yes. One can have a strong mind or a controlled mind when the mind is, the energies are flowing inward. I hope that's best I can answer that, unless somebody else has a better uh,
Yes,
reply.
yes, 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 Vijayji. Very much true. Abhinavji, if you want to add something, please do feel so.
Sure. See, to say I am quite strong with my mind, I think that's great. Like, being self-confident in your own spirituality is very important. But even in that statement, there's a bit of unsurety. I am quite strong with my mind. And the only thing that sticks out there is spirituality is a scientific process. And so once we have control over our mind, we know straight away, because the way in which we deal with our energy is such that not a single joule of it is misdirected. And so in that state, we don't say I'm quite strong with my mind. We say I am strong with my mind. So there is a subtle difference in that, spiritually speaking, the control of mind is reduced to a science. It's not reduced to an intuitive process where we think, oh, today I'm about 90% controlled. Yesterday was about 98. Today's about 95. That process of, thinking, oh, how much control do I have? That's going to change every day. But if you reduce that to a science, and you give yourself something to mark it by, such as, how have I directed my energy today? Then you are able to more accurately represent to your own self, am I actually in control of my mind, or is the mind in control of me? So that's what I would add.
Thank you, Abhinavji. There are a couple of more questions, but I think we don't have that much time. I'll just pick up one more question, and other questions probably we can link it up more in the next session. One question is saying that when I take a decision, I am not stable. I'm fluctuating a lot. What should I do, and why it is happening? Abhinavji?
Sure. Well, as we talked about today, we have to analyze what the source of that fluctuation is. And to put it very simply, having taken into account all the things we've talked about, it's that tussle between, what we want to do and what we end up doing. So what the soul desires and what the mind, or what we want to do, what I want to do, the soul wants to do, and what the mind ends up using that energy for. And so the source of that fluctuation is always going to be that conflict. And so to control that, the only real escape is practice. We don't get better at anything without practice. And, there's an ancient way to practice that, which is meditation, which is sadhana. And so, the fluctuation will always be there. And that's one thing that we shouldn't resist against, because when we start to resist against things, they often start to persist even stronger. So the aim really is to accept the nature of the mind. Okay, the mind is distracting. What can I do about it? I can practice a meditation, something which allows me to better bring it to a narrower scope. Maybe if it's distracted in 10 things yesterday, it'll be distracted in 5 things today. And slowly, it won't be distracted into different things. It will be aligned with ourselves and what we want to do. And so this also obviously helps with taking decisions as well, because the more still we are, the easier it is to consider the complete context of something. When I was talking about famous sportsmen and how they get in the zone, one common experience they have is they're able to take in a lot of information and take a decision in a microsecond after, a kind of decision which maximizes their success. So the fluctuation will always be there, but if we practice and if we are rigorous with our practice, then that will slowly dissipate without even us realizing it.
Thank you, Abhinavji. And now with this closure, I would like to thank all the speakers who joined today, Abhinavji and Vijayji. Stay tuned for next week, Saturday, where we will discuss about meditation and ancient science. Till then, Jai Sadgurudev. Goodbye to all of you. Thank you.